Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the DeYoung. On behalf of our museum, I'm pleased to welcome you. I'm Claudia Schmuckli. I'm the Holly Johnson and Parker Harris Chief Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art here at the DeYoung Museum, the Fine Arts Museums at large, and also the curator of Isaac Julien's survey here at the museum, which we're here to celebrate tonight. So, it truly is a pleasure to host you tonight, and I promise I won't take up much of your time, but I just wanted to extend a heartfelt, warm welcome, because this show means so much to me. Isaac and I have been talking about it for quite a few years, and it is absolutely thrilling to see it come together in this beautiful execution that I'm still digesting myself, because it's only been a few days. So one thing I will say, though, is that it features 10 multi-channel video installations and 4 works from the 80s. And in doing so, it's the first exhibition in the entire world, really, that gives a comprehensive survey of Isaac Julien's incredible practice. Clearly, you know everything about it because you have the pleasure and the privilege of working with him on a daily basis. And I do want to extend my deepest thanks to you for bringing him to the Bay in a more permanent fashion. I've known him for quite a few years, but having him nearby really was an additional incentive to press on and make this project happen. And he's such an important artist. And I know that together with Mark Nash, the Moving Image Lab is doing incredible work at UC Santa Cruz. And I just wish that many young filmmakers, many more, could have the privilege of working with Isaac and Mark in that way. And so it is truly a momentous occasion for me. And I know that many of you haven't really had the occasion to see the show yet, but I really do hope that after the exciting panel discussion that we are about to witness, you will take the time and at least catch a first glimpse, an impression of it. As many of you know, it won't be enough time to see it comprehensively. So please do come back and please do spread the word. It's always been an important exhibition for me. I've been thinking about it for years. I couldn't imagine it being and feeling more urgent than it is right now. So thank you, Isaac, and thank you, UC Santa Cruz, and also thank you for your support of this exhibition, because you have contributed to the making of this project in several ways. We have a wonderful curatorial fellow who is working with us, who's tremendous, and entre nous, I would love to hire her. She's amazing, and stay with us. But also just, through you showing up tonight and providing an audience, a captive audience, I hope, and becoming advocates for the work. I promise you're in for a ride, because there's a few works that have rarely been seen. Some of you may never have seen them, and so I really hope it'll be a rewarding experience for you. And with that, I would like to turn it over to John Pine to welcome you formally. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claudia. Good evening, and welcome to our Inspire series, an opportunity to connect with our slug community and hear from some of our exciting faculty at UC Santa Cruz. What a joy to be here with alumni and friends from across our campus community. UC Santa Cruz is honored to host you all tonight. My name is John Pine. I'm the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Alumni Engagement at UC Santa Cruz. The UC Santa Cruz Alumni Association is over 160,000 graduates strong, with nearly 35,000 right here in the Bay Area. We host numerous programs to help you stay connected, and I encourage you to stay in touch and continue joining us at future events. And since many of you are so close, you may want to join us for Return to the Redwoods in August, which is our biggest alumni event of the year. I always tell people, think of it like alumni summer camp. This program gives you a chance to come back with your friends, your family, and stay on campus in Santa Cruz. And I can guarantee you it is a lot of fun. This is our third year doing it. We expect 1,000 people back in Santa Cruz this year. Very exciting. If you want to learn more, come find me after the program. I also know we have many parents and family members of our current students here tonight. We're excited to count you as part of our community. Thank you for being here. And before we begin, I'd like to introduce some members of our community who've joined us tonight. Members of our university leadership, Mark Davis, Vice Chancellor, University Advancement, PK Agarwal, Dean, University Extension, Jody Green, Associate Campus Provost and Professor of Literature, and Lori Kletzer, Executive Vice Chancellor and Campus Provost. I know you probably can't see them up there, but if you want to wave, they're up there somewhere. There they are. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Also, we have some of our most dedicated volunteers, including current and former members of the UC Santa Cruz Board of Trustees and the UC Santa Cruz Alumni Association, Bill Danaher, Anu Luther Matra, Kieran Malhotra, SB Master, and Ken Feingold. Again, if you all just want to wave, I know you're up here. If you could see them, I encourage you to introduce yourself to one of these folks and let them inspire you to become more involved with the future of UC Santa Cruz. The Inspire series has brought together alumni, parents, and friends in Los Angeles, New York, Seattle, and today in San Francisco to gather and learn more about some of the biggest ideas coming from UC Santa Cruz. I'm excited and indeed inspired about the future of UC Santa Cruz. Now, it is my great honor to introduce our Chancellor, Cynthia Larive. As a first-generation college graduate, Chancellor Larive has been committed to student success, inclusion, and equity. At UC Santa Cruz, she's prioritized improving graduation rates and eliminating equity gaps for students from groups traditionally underrepresented in higher education. She is an accomplished chemist and has encouraged the participation and success of women in other underrepresented groups in STEM. Chancellor Larive.
Well, thanks so much, John. It's great that you could all join us this evening. I'm just delighted to be here tonight and see so many of you here. And thank you for being supporters of UC Santa Cruz. Our network of alumni and parents and friends is so strong, and it continues to grow. And here we are now in our 60th year, and as John said, we now have about 160,000 alumni. We appreciate your connections to our campus, and now more than ever, we need your help being vocal advocates for UC Santa Cruz and for the UC system. UC Santa Cruz's trajectory has been remarkable, and it continues on an upward push. We have a track record of groundbreaking multidisciplinary research and distinguished scholarship, creativity, and innovation, and you will surely experience that this evening. Our faculty make an impact not only by advancing their fields, they help us imagine what the world can be. They view their research through the lens of creating a more sustainable, just, inclusive, and equitable world. That's what makes UC Santa Cruz unique. And I believe that now more than ever, this country needs UC Santa Cruz, and I hope you'll agree. So this Inspire series was born out of a desire to pull back the curtain on the work that unfolds at UC Santa Cruz, to give our community, alumni, friends, and supporters the opportunity to hear firsthand from our incredible faculty about the work they're doing and what inspires them. So tonight's event is very special. And as you heard from Claudia, we're here to celebrate this new exhibit of filmmaker and artist Sir Isaac Julien, and to learn more about what drove his creation of the art of reimagining our world. Isaac is Distinguished Professor of the Arts and began his tenure at our campus in 2018. The following year, he and curator, writer, and professor Mark Nash established the Isaac Julien Lab at UC Santa Cruz. The lab is a collaborative platform for producing moving images, photographic works, exhibitions, and publications. It's an incredibly rich training ground for students, providing them hands-on experience in filmmaking, curating, and artistic research. Isaac also teaches in our world-renowned History of Consciousness program. He's received countless international honors. In 2022, he was knighted as part of Queen Elizabeth's birthday honors, and in 2024 was elected as a Fellow of the British Academy, joining a prestigious group whose past members include Sir Winston Churchill and the celebrated poet and playwright Seamus Heaney. We're extremely lucky to also have joining us tonight another distinguished UC Santa Cruz faculty member and someone who honestly is more qualified than me to engage Isaac in conversation about his art and his creative inspirations. Jennifer Gonzalez is the Patricia and Roland Rebele Chair and Professor of History of Art and Visual Culture at UC Santa Cruz. Jennifer has been closely affiliated with our campus for over a quarter century, completing her PhD in History of Consciousness before joining our faculty. She is also a faculty member in the Whitney Museum Independent Study Program in New York. Her research engages theoretical discourses of feminism, diaspora, and decoloniality in contemporary art, and her publications appear in international journals, and her books include Subject to Display, Reframing Race in Contemporary Installation Art, and Chicano and Chicana Art, a Critical Anthology, which in 2020 was included as the top art books of the decade by Art News magazine. So it's my great pleasure to invite Isaac and Jennifer to the stage.
Well, it's lovely to see you all, and I'm so happy you're here tonight. And I'm truly delighted and thrilled to be in conversation with Isaac, who I've known for many years. I first saw his work in 2007, is that right, at Metro Pictures Gallery, where Western Union Small Boats was playing, and I just wanted to say that I walked into the gallery and I had a completely out-of-body experience with this work of art, and I said, I have to write about it. That was my immediate sense, that this work was so moving and very critical, and many of my interests are in sync with yours. So let me start with the first question, which is really about some of your early work. You began as a filmmaker. You worked on very important cinema about Langston Hughes, the poet, called Looking for Langston, and another film about the incredibly critical theorist Frantz Fanon, whose book, Black Skin, White Masks, has been transformative for a lot of thinkers. I wonder if you could say something about how that early work and its focus impacted the subsequent work to come. And maybe if you want to say a little bit about what was happening at that time in the 1980s in London around race politics, queer politics, your early motivation.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Such an honor to speak here with you. And also, in a way, it's really, very interesting to have these questions around early works, like Looking for Langston, made in 1989, and Frantz Fanon, Black Skins, White Masks, which was made in 1994-95 with my partner, Mark Nash. And I should say that in relationship to a work like Looking for Langston, it's a work which, was made during the AIDS pandemic. I was really thinking about how can one resist all of the political turmoil and emotional turmoil, which was part of our lives at that particular time, and thinking about how we could begin, in a way, to think about a kind of politics and aesthetics of resistance, and, in a way, turn into the Harlem Renaissance, turn into Langston Hughes' work, to his poems, but then counterposing that with a young poet, Essex Hemphill, who was writing a lot about his experience as a sort of black gay artist, And in a sense, there was a kind of synthesis between the past and the present. I was also looking at black and white photography, look at Robert Mapplethorpe's work, which of course had been censored at that particular time, and then really thinking a lot about the lives which people were undergoing, because lots of my friends were dying quite young, and questions of mortality was really at the forefront. And I would say that in a way, with Looking for Langston, I wanted to find a kind of language, images, that would be images of a kind of resistance and, in a way, reparation. What do you do in the face of a kind of, political onslaught, cultural onslaught, and, in a way, an onslaught which can bring about a kind of substance, and so it's about creating images which were about absence, but images which were looking into the archive, pulling out the archive and using the archive as a springboard for reinvention. I was really interested in reinvention. And so in that film, it's about reinvention, it's about a kind of way of thinking about a body politics which would somehow be able to maybe live beyond its moment, because I didn't know if I was going to live beyond my moment at that particular time, and to try to create a world, to dream a world that would be there for the kind of future. And a film like France Fanon Blackskin's White Mask, in a sense, it has its story actually connected to Santa Cruz, because Mark and I were invited to Santa Cruz in 1994 to teach in History of Consciousness. We had already started developing a film which would be a portrait of Frantz Fanon, and I would say 3/4 of the way through our teaching, we got a phone call from the BBC saying, "You've been commissioned." And we basically returned back to Santa Cruz the year after showing that film. But it was during our time when we were teaching that we got introduced to someone who taught in Santa Cruz, Victor Bergin, introduced us to Françoise Vergès, who was a student in Berkeley, who was writing her PhD on Fanon and psychiatry. Lucien Taylor was an anthropologist who's doing a book on Martinican intellectuals. He introduced us to the Fanon family. And so if you see that film, apart from the work that we're doing with Stuart Hall, who'd come to the Centre for Cultural Studies with his partner, we knew quite well, but in a way there was a kind of synergy that was happening. And the Frantz Fanon film really, my interest in it was really about the way that he was able to synthesize a kind of psychoanalytic reading, a psychosomatic reading of culture and race, and to use that, of course, in terms of his own profession in his short life. He wrote so many important books, but we were particularly fascinated. We were in Fanon mania, all the black artists in the 80s and 90s. We kind of lived and breathed Fanon, but it was more the Frantz Fanon Blackskin's White Mask, not the Wretched of the Earth. It was more the psychoanalytic and, in a way, sort of philosophical, imagistic ways that he was really looking at the complex questions around representation and race.
I think that early time when you were coming to these texts and in deep conversation with people about how is it that we think we know what we know through images, and how do images shape what we think is possible, was really an origin for also shifting from cinema eventually to multi-screen display. And I wonder if you could just say a little, because your spaces are still quite cinematic, so I wonder if you could say a little bit about the desire, the move to installation art and to producing then these multi-screen displays, initially 3 screens, but then eventually reaching as many as 10 screens. And we could, if you want to, look a little bit at the Long Road to Mazatlan, where we have sort of 3 screens, but they're connected. And then we move to more than that. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Well, in a way, kind of one of the amazing things which we got the invitation from Claudia to think about early works, free screen works like The Long Road to Mazatlan. And this whole exhibition is involved in a whole curatorial project of conservation where we've conserved 8 works, of which Long Road to Mazatlan is one of them, made in 1999. And in this work, it's in a way the first work where really I'm thinking about the relationship between sort of cinema and showing the gallery context, by the house, showing the gallery context when you can show in the cinema, and thinking about the ways in which there's a kind of difference that can be offered within this context, where we can look at things in a almost post-cinematic sense, but at the same time trying to think about the history of cinema and the triptych formation in this work grew from that desire to kind of rewrite the rules of cinema to a certain extent. And it was an exciting time, the advent of new technologies, projection, in this case using back projection, and then quoting from, if you like, iconic aspects of contemporary art, Hockney, Warhol, and in this work looking at hyperbolic representations of masculinity, Tex-Mex culture, looking to the South, and really, it's a film about desire, and it's also a film about betrayal and loss. It's based on a Tennessee Williams play, collaborating with Javier de Frutas, the choreographer and dancer who appears in the work as one of the main protagonists. And it's a film which, and I must say that one of the really exciting things about making this work and doing this conservation of this work from 16mm film to 4K and having it presented how it was originally presented is a way that, we can go back to these particular moments and, one becomes fascinated by one's own work. It sounds very narcissistic, but it's more to do with the fact that there are certain adventures in these very early experiments, and of course the alibi of, in a way, making a work that would try to start to question how the looking relations are developed. Because of course in the cinema, we sit in the cinema, we're entertained to a certain extent, and of course in the gallery, there's a bit of a question mark about where you look, how you look, and positing that question, as it were, as a way to think about images in a different way.
So you're anticipating one of my questions, which has to do with the idea of parallel montage, which is a phrase that you and Mark use to talk about this method. And one of the things that people will see when they go into the exhibit is that these exhibitions are non-narrative, but nevertheless, there's a kind of a story unfolding. And that's one of the things that's so beautiful and tender about a number of the pieces. And I wanted to bring Paradise Omeros in and also just give people a sense, just with these images, of the multi-screen engagement with space and bodies and architectural engagement. But because the screen isn't flat, it's often in this kind of surround space. We get a better sense of the fact that we're immersed in it. And one of the things that's really impressive about the work is the scale of the work and how that scale impacts. For example, in Baltimore, we see the scale kind of surround. There's a lot of play in your work that engages with forms of symmetry, as we see here in some of the Baltimore pieces. And there's a lot of kind of formal repetition in the space. Very much painterly kind of space is created as well. So I wonder, and this was going to be a later question, but I'll ask you now, there's a way in which your work has a kind of lyricism, and in a quote you once said, I'm a poet, I'm interested in poetry. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that. You've commissioned poets for some of your works, and the way the screens engage each other really has a lot to do with forms of syncopation, repetition. We might think of verses or stanzas or maybe a chorus. So I wonder if you could say a little bit about the poetic and the musical in terms of your editing approach.
Oh, thank you. I think in a way, in a way they're songs, and in this sense, a work like Baltimore, for example, was a work which, in a way, set off the whole sculpture relationship in terms of working and quoting from blaxploitation films. which are kind of antithetical to my own work. And how did this come about? It came about because I was teaching at Harvard a course on black cinema, diaspora cinema, and I thought really I should teach a course where there's a kind of closer relationship with the students to their vernacular. And I got approached by the independent cinema channel then to make a film about black action films from the 70s. And of course, I learnt so much. I was also teaching the course and doing my research, and from that, making that film, we called Badass Cinema. Basically, Baltimore, in a way, synthesizes the aesthetics of black action films for a video art telos. And in the work, we have Melvin Van Peebles, the late Melvin Van Peebles, who meets his doppelganger, meets a waxworker. And the reason why he meets the waxwork, because this film, which is called Baltimore, it was commissioned by a Museum of Art Wars, which had commissioned Fred Wilson to make a really famous work called Mine the Museum. And I thought, how could I mine the museum? And so when I came across the Great Blacks in Wax Museum, I found my answer, because there was no difference between the waxworks, which they were, in a way, making and portraying in terms of a memorialization of African-American history, the history of the Waters Art Gallery, which had these beautiful Renaissance paintings. And what I decided to do is to form a seance between black wax works and these artworks. And so, in a sense, Baltimore is also about Afrofuturism. And the wonderful thing about the presentation here is if we've done a kind of restoration of that work, a conservation from the original 16 mil to 4K, and the curatorial chief of the Museum of the Academy in LA, when they showed it, came here and saw it last week, and she just couldn't believe how it looked, and nor could we, So, so it's really exciting to show that work, and I think, in a way, this relationship between, I think I forgot your original question. Jennifer.
Well, no, it's quite all right. No, you were going right toward it, which is we were talking about the musical and the poetic, and sort of the way poetry, lyricism, rhythm, syncopation operates for you in the work. And you can talk about this piece. We could talk about another piece if you want to. We could certainly talk about 10,000 Waves in that way. Do you want to say more about that question now, or yes?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a different way, in a work like 10,000 Waves, which was again a film which I was struck by the tragedy which occurred in Morecambe Bay when 23 Chinese cocker shell pickers died in the north of England who came from the Fujian province. And I thought, well, what happened there? Why did they come from such a long journey to have this kind of terrible end? And, I started to do research, and, 6 years later, I decided I would tell the tale from Mazu's point of view, not from my point of view, from Mazu's point of view, and go back to the 5th century, go back to the Ming period, and to look at this question of migration and to see that that migratory sort of roots have been taking place in this area for centuries, thousands of years.
And can you say who Mazu is?
Mazu is a sort of goddess from the Fujian province. She's prayed as a deity all over sort of Asia, Southeast Asia. And in this work, she's played by Maggie Chong. And basically, she's able to surveil the spaces. And there are many Mazu tales, and the tale that I was interested in was the tale of Yishin Island, which is when she brings the people who are in peril at sea to Yishin Island, to the place of safety. But in this instance, of course, she wasn't able to. And what I've done in the work is to do this journey going back into Chinese history, and as a way to critique all the kind of rather, if you like, provincial debates about migration in the West and in Europe, as a way to say that, you know, something here has been happening for a very long time, and yeah.
So I have 10,000 waves up on the screen right now, and we're seeing some of the waves, and there's some very beautiful moments where you've invited some key Chinese collaborators to work with you on this piece as part of a kind of memorial gesture for those that were lost in the tragedies. And so, as you said, these 24 people who were out working, picking cockles, were washed away because they couldn't read a sign in English because they spoke Chinese that told them to beware of the tide. So a lot of it also has to do with mistranslation and economic duress and sort of the conditions of global capital that bring those bodies to England to do that labor. And I thought one of the most beautiful things about the piece was at the end, the poet Wang Ping you invited to talk about, or just to write a poem in response to this, and he talks about the idea of trying to communicate with those who are under the water, you know, and what does it mean to engage with that communication. So there's a way in which the work is both a study and a memorial. What we're seeing in these other screens, just really quickly, and you'll see it when you go down there, but another part of 10,000 Waves is acknowledging the fact that the UK had an international settlement in Shanghai. And one section of the piece is about the kind of British Chinese relations in Shanghai that goes back to cinema from the 1930s. And so we have, you know, this other landscape of thinking, and then the contemporary landscape of freeways and highways and global capital in that piece. So I want to go to my next question, which is about history. In this, none of the slides we're seeing just here, but you'll see when you watch 10,000 Waves, there are very clear references to historical Chinese landscape painting. There are wonderful references even to Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, so contemporary cinema. Could you say a little bit about history and time travel in your work? Not only this piece, Western Union Small Boats includes images of the Palazzo Ganghi. So we go back, I'm going to just quickly go back to that piece. Here, the interior of an Italian palazzo, which is the site where immigrants kind of come face to face with the Italian wealth and the history of, in fact, slavery, which Sicily was a part of in the earlier days when these palazzos were built, as well as, if we look at continuing Western Union Small Boats, as well as Frederick Douglass, which we're going to come to in a minute, with Lessons of the Hour. In each of these pieces, you go back in history, you take history and you bring it up to the present without losing sight of the present, because again, in each of these pieces, the present moment is with us. The crossing of the Mediterranean Sea and the loss of life from North Africa, the tragic case of Morecambe Bay, or in the case of Frederick Douglass, Black Lives Matter movement, and how it's tied into Frederick Douglass saying, you know, we need to deal with this question in this very hour, right? It's a beautiful part of that piece. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that time travel, why it's so important for you to bring past and present together.
Thank you.
That was a bit long, sorry.
No, it's great. I love it. I mean, I think, you know, one of the things in relationship to thinking about these works, I mean, for example, when I first started making Looking for Langston, there is this question around time and time travel and deliberate blurring of times, both historical and contemporary. And I think, in a sense, one of the things which has all been very important in the works is really about the transgression of time. And that can be done either by, in the case of Lessons of the Hour, that we have ostensibly someone who's in the 19th century, and we're playing with time in that work, But of course, the relationship to the contemporaneous is really important because it's really about the connection to these questions, which are questions which are very relevant or ghost in our present. So I think the question around time travel and trying to pull back time, and thinking about the ways in which, in Douglas's moment, he was contemplating very serious questions, to do with abolitionism. He was a slave. He'd written this remarkable publication, and basically his life as a slave, the way that he was able to articulate that, when Ray Ferron, who plays Douglas in the work as a kind of Royal Shakespearean actor, a black Royal Shakespearean actor, he recognized the Shakespearean references in his work immediately, and I think, he recognized, that is, Ray Ferron, that when he was talking to the contemporary audience, who are deliberately dressed in modern day and in 19th century, there was something about the present which was really both haunted by the past. And I think there's a way in which, in this work, I was really trying to bring these different times, the question of surveillance, the poetics of attention, which is a wonderful interview between myself and Jennifer, which she coined, which is really at work in this piece. But in a way, I would say that this question of time and the transgression of it in the works are very much a central motif. And so, it's there in Looking for Langston at the end when they start dancing to Can't You Feel It, which is a kind of anthem from the 90s or late 80s. Or if we think about, for example, in other works where there's a deliberate play of time, like in Lina Bardi and Marvelous Entanglement, you have, a younger Lina played by Fernanda Torres, who, as you know, was up for won the Golden Globe, was up for an Oscar, and her mother, Fernanda Montenegro, who plays a more mature Lina Bardi. And so I like this idea of playing with time as a gesture of, in a way, politically joining the moments where we think certain questions are done, but they're not, as we all know now, of course. And so I think there's this, and I think also, there's also a question of technology, technology and the role that technologies play in thinking in relationship to time, and yeah.
Well, that comes through. Thank you. That comes through really nicely in the Lessons of the Hour, where Frederick Douglass is talking about photographs and pictures. And at the time, he's talking about small black and white images, potentially daguerreotypes. He himself was one of the most photographed men in the 19th century, which is a really interesting bit of information. And I learned that through reading about your piece. In his discourse on pictures, many of the things he says could apply to us today. And that's what I thought was so wonderful watching and listening to him talk about how people come into the homes and you're expected to have an opinion about the pictures that are there on the walls and so forth. And sort of, I was thinking about our cell phones and how now instead this is the device that we use. And I love the way that you find just the right phrases and texts from these historical sources to bring us into the present and make us think about image culture, which is deeply embedded in all of your work. Painting, references to cinema, references to photography. A lot of your work could actually be seen as its own art historical study. That is, you're very careful and thoughtful about what you're pointing to, what you're bringing in, all of the references that are there for the people who understand those art historical references. It's very visually rich and satisfying in that way in terms of the work. It also takes a lot of people to produce these works. And I think a lot of people think about, well, how does that really happen? And I thought one question that would be interesting for us to talk about briefly is collaboration. You've worked a long time with Mark Nash, your partner. You've also collaborated with teams. You've collaborated with dancers, poets, other photographers, filmmakers, editors. I wonder if you could talk a little bit in the spirit of UC Santa Cruz about collaboration and interdisciplinarity, working across these different art forms in your own practice.
Well, I think in a way, kind of, it's really where the kind of, if you like, the humanities and the arts join in one's own practice, because I think there's a way in which, the question of research and the question of a kind of rigorous approach to that, but then at the same time, the question of an interest in, theoretical ideas and their translation into a visual arena or field. I always remember, coming to Santa Cruz in 1994, and there's a comment by Donna Howe where she spoke about, that the films or works we were making were their own form of theoretical knowledge. And I do think there's a way in which there is the kind of area of research in relationship to making works, which produce their own kind of critical knowledges. But that, of course, are very much interpolated by the critical knowledges that surround one, especially in a university setting. But I would say that in my works generally, if I wasn't able to collaborate with Claudia to make this exhibition, it wouldn't happen, So it's a curatorial intervention, and how the creator may look on one's work, which gives a kind of key for how you may think about past work, or how you might develop that work, and how those things come in conversation with one another. The relationship to design and architecture. Everybody knows, I'm not very technical or technological. And so I need a lot of help, And so if it wasn't for the team of people that I work with, Tom Cullen, who, by the way, has come to Santa Cruz and given course and classes, a lot of the questions that students have around editing, I could answer some of them, but I probably would need Adam Finch to answer most of them. And so I would say that in terms of the way that we plan things, the question of scenography and the way that we collaborate, like across the field, all of those things very much interpolates one's practice and is very important in terms of how, making the work comes into being. And I would say that also then there's the way in which I think, like the approach to research and how that is always a product of listening, but realizing that what you're involved in is always, slightly different from how it's going to enter into the world, so to speak. But, I have a studio of 7 to 8 people. And so, in a sense, this question of collaboration and how you're able to really make the intervention is a really important one. And cinematographers, designers, actors, they're all part of, if you like, the sort of labor, 'cause it takes a lot of labor to make the work, and that was also one of the things around the foregrounding of technology in the work, and showing the apparatus in some works, like at the end of 10,000 Waves, we reveal, as it were, the behind the scenes, It's not just to show the behind the scenes, it's also to show how images are being produced, their production, revealing the labor in making images.
In fact, many of your pieces engage labor. I'm looking over there to see how we're doing on time. Okay. beautifully. And I think a lot about the question of, again, coming back to global capital, international conditions of labor, inequality. All of these themes emerge in the work in very important ways. And it is very moving to me that you're attending not only to these broader questions, but even in your own practice, you want to draw our attention to the labor, the fabrication of the very thing that we're looking at, and the various people who participate in some of that fabrication in the scenes themselves. And I think that that self-conscious engagement is really a wonderful way of sort of Brechtian breaking of the fourth wall, but it also invites us to loop through that set of scenes and think about the labor involved in the broader context that you're thinking. So I think that's really a wonderful example. I think we're going to take a couple of questions from the audience. Is that right? Now?
We have some from in advance.
Okay, we have them in advance. Okay, very good. Thank you,
Again,
Isaac.
Thank you, James.
everybody. Just waiting for my mic to come on. I will tell you here, and then maybe you can repeat it for me, Jennifer. If you could talk a little bit about the collaboration between UC Santa Cruz and your lab and how you engage students.
Yeah, that's the first question. So the first question is, could you tell us a little bit more about the collaborations between UC Santa Cruz and your lab in London, and how our Santa Cruz students are benefiting?
Well, I think, when we first came, there was a kind of creative approach to thinking about the pedagogy of, say, art education. My partner, Mark Nash, has been involved in the Royal College, running the curatorial course for 7 years. How do you, in a way, train or educate young people to become curators? And so I think, there's this sort of question about the relationship between, what you teach and then what is the profession that students may want to enter into. So I think when we came to Santa Cruz, we wanted to keep that connection live. And if we are making an exhibition, like when we made the exhibition at Neil McAvoy Foundation, where we first showed Lessons of the Hour, we used the installation and filmed its installing, and that was all part of the elements of what we'd be teaching, for students. We filmed the process of how you make an exhibition, how you install, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really taking your practice and using that as a springboard that would, allow for an entry. And I guess one of the things that we worked on quite hard was to get our Mellon grant. He says our Mellon grant, but actually it wasn't our Mellon grant. It was a grant that was, in a way, very much supervised, by Mark and with Santa Cruz University. And now we have Mellon Fellows, one who, Claudia spoke about, who worked with her here at the museum and on the exhibition, another person, student, art history student who's working at the Kramnik collection, and another student who is a historian who's been working with us on our archive, both here in London and in Santa Cruz. And our next cohort will be at the Academy Museum in Los Angeles, the Banff Museum in Berkeley, and we may have a second person that goes on the Kramnik Foundation. And so I think it's really, and then in London, we've worked with students who have been developing projects, supported their projects, their research, and some of their production. And so it's really making a synergy between, practice and, well, not theory, but, in a way, a relationship where you have this, avenue, because, I guess not all students are going to be professors. They're in the arts are going to want to do other things. And so it's really making that sort of bridge possible.
Yeah, so many students have benefited from that. Both in the U.S. and internationally. So it's really a wonderful, wonderful grant. Do we have another question?
We have one more, and we're going to close this out with this question. Why did you decide to come to UC Santa Cruz?
Oh, well, why not? You know. I mean, I think that, in fact, our next work is about Santa Cruz. We're sort of looking at speculative science fiction, questions of ecology. We're going to be filming in a number of different locations, both here and in the Bay Area, and they're being connected to Palazzo Te in Italy, which is a kind of, you could say it's a kind of pleasure palace of the 15th century, something to that effect. Giulio Romano paintings, but we're really also trying to look at the question of metamorphosis for the 21st century and what that means. What could that be? Yep. I think it's important to be able to make works which are not always in retaliation to what would be the politics at hand, but to go beyond political moments and to transcend them in some way, and I think that's what we're trying to do in this work. Next work that Mark and I are making together.
Let's thank Isaac Julien for his amazing work.